parents come to us for specifically.
Well, I can I can say for where I'm coming from was I have an 8.5 year old and a 6.5 year old. And you know, my upbringing was very authoritarian. Do it because I told you to do it, when I tell you to do it, that kind of thing. And after teaching for so many, I mean, we've been teaching now for almost 30 years. And I've, you know, you learn what works best with kids and with adults over all that time of teaching. So my approach with my own kids has been different, but um, it's interesting because the I'm tracking the results with with my kids. So the whole like soft parenting thing, on I guess it really comes down to the swing, like going from having a really authoritarian dad to trying to not be an authoritarian dad. It's like, how far does that swing back the other way where it's overdoing it, where you give them too much space, you give them too much autonomy, you give them too much room, and then they become entitled and they don't, because they're young and they don't really understand gratitude. So it's like, where's that line? So I know for myself, one of the things that I'm noticing now is a bit of entitlement with my eldest one because he's a little bit emotional, um, and he's taking things for granted. So now it's like, okay, do we? And I'm a big believer in natural consequences. So it's like I'm not just going to punish you. Like, I don't really punish my kids. It's just a matter of, okay, you did this is the choice you decided. This is the consequences, and so you don't like the consequences, but you made the choice, so now you got to deal with it. So I'm a big believer in that. And my kids are good. Like, don't get me wrong, but there's definitely like, okay, like how do I tweak this with my oldest because he's a little bit more um he's his awareness, his situational and his self-awareness is not on the high end. So he tends to point outward to be as the reason externally is the reason for his problems. So he doesn't take accountability for certain things, but he does take accountability for other things. So obviously it's a process. He's growing, he's maturing. Um, but that's a big one when I see with parents that go too far on the um, trying to be supportive instead of just letting your kids sit in it. And that's a big one, for both of my boys. It's like, okay, this is what happened. Like Cage yesterday was poking holes in his box for the snow shovel that I got that we're gonna have to return because they sent me the wrong one, and he's poking holes in it, and I go, and again, so the lenient part of me was letting them play with this box that I knew I had to send back, but they're like running around the house playing with it, whereas my dad would have flipped shit, and been like screaming. But I don't behave that way. But so at one point he's like poking holes in it with one of his toys. And I turn to him and I'm like, dude, I have to send that back. Can you please stop poking holes in it? And he goes, okay. And then like 5 seconds later, I hear him poke another hole in it. And then I was like, dude, are you serious? And then that turned into a whole situation where, he knew he messed up. And then he tried to run and stick his face in the couch. And I said, no, dude, you made the decision to do it. So now you're going to have to stand here like a big kid and accept what happened. I said, I'm not mad at you. And then we went into a whole trust conversation. Like you made a promise and said you wouldn't do it, but then you did it anyway. And then that's where, and this is the part that I do like about it is, whereas I didn't tell my dad shit about how I felt. Like I held everything in. Like I'm not telling you anything. Like it took some prompting. It took some like, listen, I'm not, I went through the whole, you made a promise and trust. And I went through that conversation with them about, if you say things to me and then you don't do it, then that makes it so I don't trust you. And is that what you want? You want me to not believe you when you say things? And he's like, no. And so I said, so why did you do it? And he said, because I wanted to. And like, but he said it like he was like, it was hard for him to get it out, but he said it. And so another thing like I've done, which is different than it was when I was growing up, was like I've told him the worst thing you could ever do is lie to me. So like when they tell me stuff, like I don't punish them. I just go, thank you for telling me. So him telling me that was, again, it's that trust bond of, and that's where I like the supportive parenting part, where it's like, hey, I want you to be able to tell me things because that means later on when you get into trouble, you're going to come to me so that I can help bail you out instead of you, making it worse because you're afraid to tell me, but at the same time, it's that, like, dude, you have to stand here and take it. Like, you don't get to put your face in and pretend, and cry and play martyr and do all that happy horse shit. Like, you're gonna have to face it because you did it. So that's the part where I think, you have to go back to a little bit of, me, I don't know what to say, the old school way, but like, hey, you got to sit in it. Make your kid sit in the uncomfortableness, and that's hard, I think, for parents because they have to sit in the uncomfortable moment. Like, I got to sit here and be like, this fucking sucks,
Yeah.
you know? And at the same time, balance the anger part because I'm like, I just fucking asked you not to do that and you did it anyway, because that's like a big fuck you. Like, hey, I'm doing it whatever I want. So, um, I think that's where people get messed up. I mean, from my perspective of the supportive or soft parenting and then maybe that goes back to what Shonda was just saying, is a lot of times it's your own shit you got to deal with, and you can't deal with your own shit, so you ease into you let your kids get away with stuff because it was whatever, you have your own baggage and you can't manage your own baggage at the time, but that's something I see, and everything is an arch. Everything is an arch. So if you're always one way or always the other way, if you're too authoritarian or you're too soft, I think it causes problems on both ways. I think you're right, when you had said the other day about it causes anxiety. Like if you don't know how to deal with being in that uncomfortable moment, how the fuck do you ever build resilience as you get older? You don't, you know? So I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Interesting. Accountability was the first thing that came to my mind when we started, when you brought up soft parenting, because, the lack of you know, accountability is lacking these days. I mean,
Uh-huh.
just look at all of like everything that's going on in social media and stuff like that. People don't understand that accountability is a big factor in making sure things are done right or correctly or uh, with humanity or whatever it is, right? So, and the other thing you brought up was, the victim mindset, and then being able to have the strength as a parent, right? To be able to sit there and make sure that your child doesn't take that victim mindset and start blaming everything else except themselves, right? And getting out from underneath, because what's that teaching our kids that later on they end up that I mean that sticks with them and that's their go-to instead of, oh wow, I did mess up. Let me take accountability and make sure I don't let it happen again. I mean, these are things that we teach in class all the time, right?
Right.
It's okay to make the mistake, but it's not okay to keep doing it over and over again, knowing that it's the wrong thing to do, right?
Right.
Less desirable thing to do. So no, I think and you're right, like with Bladen, because of the divorce and the split, and now two separate households, two separate environments. Even for myself, I found myself giving in because I didn't want him to be mad at me or, and all these guilt and all these other things. And that is hard to check. But the same thing that we teach our students is like, hey, when you feel you're inside the storm, you have to take a step back and take a breath and look at the bigger picture and look at yourself first. Right. So,
Yeah.
all big points. And it's interesting that how much, like us growing up and our parents, like my parents were totally different. They weren't around. They
Right.
gave a crap. It seemed, well, I mean, I'm saying that they didn't, but
Yeah. Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
what it seemed
Yeah.
like, right?
Yeah. We had free range when we were kids at your house.
Yeah, it was a totally different environment from my house to your house. Like I
Yeah.
remember watching you get beat. Like,
Yeah.
like wow, this is crazy.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but
Yeah.
but even then, like I still had like I had fear for my dad for getting in trouble. I mean, that even led to lying and hiding shit and stuff like the same thing, emotional stuff. And
Yeah.
like so we did grow up in different times. And but it's interesting that the parents these days, and including our generation, they only want the best for their kids, right? They only want them to feel good and happy. They don't want them to experience the hardships that they felt growing up. They don't want to mirror what their parents did to them or their environment or communities did to them, right? And I think that that has a big part to play in it, but it's not about us as parents. It's really about what's best for the kid. And
Yeah.
sorry, but what's best for the kid is sometimes is being hard on them and
Yeah.
making sure they follow through, right? And
Yeah.
so, you
Well,
know,
that's where like things that my dad used to do. There's definitely stuff that he did that it was like, he loves me. He still loves me, and he loved me then. But he was 20, he was 19 years old when I was born, and not able to master his own, fears and anxieties. So, everything was about from my perspective, everything he did was really came out of like a fear that he wasn't being respected. Like, and you're not doing it when I say to do it. And so a lot of that, the way that he managed stuff, um, wasn't helpful, but a lot of the things that he did do was helpful. Like I attribute my work ethic to my dad, because he would make us go out. He would give us chores and shit to do, and most of the time he never helped us. It was just go outside and figure it out. And then if like, oh, it's not good enough, go back and do it again, or go back and finish. So, and it was hard and it sucked and I hated it at the time, but I look back on it now and I'm like, it gave me grit,
yeah.
like the ability to knuckle down and be like, fuck this, I'll get this done. Um, and a sense of self-reliance. And that's where I look at my kids again. They're 6 and 8, so they're not, they have some minor chores around the house. The biggest thing is like that we're that I'm starting to enforce a little bit more now is, as they're getting older, is like when you're done playing with something, putting it away, because that's a big one. They have a tendency to play with shit and then just leave it. And my wife is a little different because she looks at it as, well, they play with it, and then they go play with something else, and they come back and play with it again. And I go, I get it, but they're getting older now, and they need to start to like, when I'm done working with my tools, I put my fucking tools away. So I've been modeling that behavior, and I'm not super crazy with it yet, but because Carlo's going to be 9 in the summer, and I'm going to start giving him some more chores, and there's going to be more things, that he has to do. Um, and I think that's going to be a big part of it. Like, I'm not going to go help you. And I've done it now with different things. Like when I'm outside doing stuff in the yard or shit like that, he wants to come and help. And then so when I let him help, I'll do things where I go, this is your job you got to do, and I'm not helping you with it, and you got to get it done. And he's like, oh, and you know how kids are. He'll be like, do it for 5 minutes, and he's like, ah, all right, I'm done. I'm like, no, it's not. That's not done. That's not done. That's not done. Go do it. And they hate it, but again, like that's the part where that's the stuff that becomes the grit building and self-reliance and the ability. Like what's the biggest things that we see with our staff that are all young, in their 20s, is they don't have this mentality of figuring it out on their own, you know. Um, so yeah, so that's where I mean, again, there was a lot of good that came out of my childhood too, and it's just a matter of kind of balancing that out. How do I be supportive so that my kids feel comfortable coming and tell me when they have problems, but at the same time, like they're not pussies and they can't handle shit for themselves.
What's interesting to me is like how you explained it is it's like again, if you're caught in the moment and you're worrying about them being mad at you for saying, hey, you didn't do it right, or hey, do it again, or hey, you missed this, you did, where most parents will fold and they'll like, because they don't want their kids to not like them or be mad at them or whatever it is, temper tantrums, they don't want to deal with the crying or whatever it is. But in reality, this is, us holding them accountable is not about the moment. It's about what's going to happen in the future for them. Like you
Yeah.
said, your dad gave you grit and work ethic. even though you hated it at the moment, you probably hated your dad at the moment, right?
Hmm.
Emotions are emotions, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's probably the biggest takeaway for me from this conversation. And hopefully that'll help other parents that are listening or watching this to really see, to take a step back and not let the moment feed into not let the moment rule them, and look at the
Yeah.
future and take a step back and take that breath, right? So
Well,
cool.
that's the thing we've always said about parents. Like you're your kid's first educator, and as an educator, you got to think about the downriver, the downstream aspects of how you're doing things. Um, I think a lot of parents, because they don't educate like large quantities of kids, they don't understand the patterns that are in that kids have. So they think their kid's special, and their kid is special, obviously, to them. But behavior wise, it's not the behavior is not that special. You know, it's a general behavior that all kids have, and then not until you get the 30,000 foot view of teaching hundreds and thousands of kids over years where you're like, oh, that's I've seen that behavior 5,000 times. Like I know what that is. And if and I also know that if I if I deal with that behavior in this manner, that 95% of the time the kid is going to come out on the other end stronger, even though they got to go through a rough patch, you know. And even Brandon, uh, one of our instructors, Brandon said to me um, the other day, he's like, "You really don't let them get away with it." And I'm like, and he was referring because there was a kid trying to do a technique, and I was like, "Nope, do it again. Nope, do it again. Nope." And he was like, I don't know, he was like 7 or 8. I'm like, "Nope, do it again." And he was like, "You really don't?" I'm like, "No, because it doesn't help him." And I'm being constructive while I'm doing it. I'm like, "That was good, but at the bottom line was it's not correct. So why am I going to let you get away with it if it's not correct?"
Yeah.
Within the realm of that particular kid's ability, right? Like whatever rank he was and whatever we were doing. Um, and he said he's like, "You really don't let him get away with it." I'm like, "No, I don't let him get away with it because it doesn't help him.
Yeah.
If I let him get away with it now, then he just continues to get away with it. It becomes a larger problem down the road."
Yeah. Well, that's vision. That's what I keep thinking about, is like having vision or future pacing or whatever they call it, and seeing the future and what's going to happen later. And having worked with kids for 30 years of multiple types of behaviors and kids and their you can see the results. You've seen the results of what, certain ways of managing a situation can have on kids over time, not just in the moment, you know. And then the other thing that just popped in my head, which is probably we could talk about next time too, is standards, right? And not letting people settle, not letting yourself settle for mediocrity, or and not letting a kid who doesn't understand standards to settle. They have to learn standards. It's not something that's automatic. How do they learn that other than going through the struggle and then coming out the other side and seeing the results of putting in the effort and the work?
Yeah, no, I think it lines up perfectly with this conversation. Because what's the saying? The the enemy of good is perfect, or whatever however that
Yeah.
saying goes.
Yeah.
And that's like, again, that's that line of because my older son, he's just his nature. He thinks stuff should be like when he was little, when he was born, when he was first crawling around and doing whatever. I called him two try Charlie, because if he didn't get something in 2 tries, he would just be like, "Fuck it, I don't want to do it." And there was like as he got older, there was a perfectionism aspect to it that I started to realize is like he didn't want to do it because he didn't get it right in whatever he deemed right was. And so if it wasn't right, he was just like, "Fuck it, I'll go on to the next thing." And I was like, and then I had to talk to him about, like, "Listen, dude, you don't know anything. Like, you're right now, you're trying to figure stuff out, so you're going to mess up. That's the whole point." And like we talk about, the school mistakes are neither good nor bad. It's what you learn from them. So if you keep making the same mistake over and over again, that's bad. But if you make a mistake and then you learn, oh, I don't do that, that's good. And so that's an ongoing thing, and that connects to standards of, like you said, how do you teach your kids standards, and are you overdoing it so that it becomes oppressive, and it's like no one can live up to that standard, or your expectations, because you don't know your audience, your expectations are too high, and now you're asking them to do shit that they can't do. So now you're undercutting their competence. So I think all of that is tied together. So like if you know who you're talking to and your standards are correct, then you help build confidence, and then that also builds grit and all the stuff that we were talking about.
Yep.
And then you're holding them to it. Because it is, we have our age groups are set up 4 and 5, 6 to 8, 9 to 12, and then 13 and above, and it's for that reason. Because 6 to 8 year olds can't do what a 9 to 12 year old can do.
Yep.
So I think that's another thing for parents that they struggle with is, um, how do I read how do I read what's the right standard and then hold my kid to it versus like, oh, well, I just want to help him. It's like, yes, he can handle that. Stop helping him with that. Help him with this other thing that he can't handle. I think that's a big part of it too.
Good shit.
All right.
Bang, done.
That's cool.
I
All
was
right.
gonna say I mean that was a lot of content that we can cut up and have different it's not just the weak or soft parenting.
Yeah.
Yeah, so and even getting into standards and stuff like that.
So what's your goal? Is your plan to just cut up